mir nicht einmal der Versuch, auch nur 1957 war da in Ungarn.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're going over our picks for the creepiest confessions ever uttered by history's most wicked minds.
This would have been a whodunit if Jeffrey Dahmer hadn't confessed to everything.
Jacques Clément. By 1589, France was tearing itself apart in the wars of religion, and King Henry III had lost nearly everyone's loyalty. Catholics despised him for killing the Duke of Guise, while Protestants mistrusted his shifting alliances. Enter Jacques Clément, a Dominican friar convinced he was on a mission from God. He had become increasingly radicalized in the wake of the violence between Catholics and Protestants and spoke of exterminating heretics. He formulated a plan to assassinate the king. He was promised eternal bliss if he didn't survive. Disguised as a messenger, he approached Henry and stabbed him with a dagger. He was immediately killed by the king's guard. John Wayne Gacy. To his neighbors, John Wayne Gacy was the friendly contractor who dressed up as Pogo the Clown for children's parties.
Old John Wayne Gacy was a popular socialite who spent his weekends dressed as a clown, entertaining children.
But beneath the grease paint was a sadist who murdered at least 33 young men. Police eventually uncovered a nightmare. Bodies buried beneath his suburban home. After his arrest, Gacy's confession was an exercise in manipulation.
And he seemed to be pretty proud of that. We used that to our advantage to keep him talking.
He tried to convince authorities that he had multiple personality disorder. Gacy would claim that most of his victims were runaways and liars as if to deny their humanity. Gacy laughed through interrogations while he matter-of-factly detailed his crimes. His confession became a performance almost as grotesque as his crimes.
Gacy shows his own importance, and he's the cool guy now, so he's the friend of these other males. And again, this gives him this sense of importance and prominence.
Ion Antonescu. Ion Antonescu ruled Romania with an iron fist. He aligned the country with Nazi Germany and oversaw the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Jewish and Roma people. However, he was overthrown and eventually tried for war crimes. Yet at his trial and execution, Antonescu showed no remorse. His final confession was an act of pure defiance. He declared that he had served his country faithfully and would die for Romania, insisting he had acted in his nation's best interests. Facing the firing squad, he refused the blindfold. To the end, Antonescu's calm self-righteousness twisted cruelty into some kind of evil patriotism. Andrei Chikatilo. For over a decade, Andrei Chikatilo terrorized the Soviet Union, murdering more than 50 people.
Detectives desperately needed proof of his guilt. They needed a confession.
A mild-mannered teacher by day, he became known as the Butcher of Rostov once his atrocities came to light. When finally captured, his confession was one of the most horrifying ever recorded. Chikatilo described his crimes in vivid clinical detail, explaining how killing gave him satisfaction.
He probably, in some respects, wanted to be caught. I can't imagine somebody doing that for all those many years and not realizing that he was living in a hell of his own creation.
I couldn't help myself, he said. At times he laughed, at others he wept, insisting that he was the mistake of nature society had created. Chikatilo's confession was so graphic that even hardened investigators were left sickened by his chilling self-awareness.
Chikatilo was more than willing to show how he disarmed people, how he tricked them.
Ante Pavelić. As the founder of Croatia's fascist Ustashi movement, Ante Pavelić ruled his Nazi-aligned puppet state with unimaginable cruelty.
At the time, Croatia was an ally of the Nazis, and its leader, Ante Pavelić, modeled himself on Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini.
Under his command, hundreds of thousands of Serbs, Jews, and Roma were exterminated. When the Axis was defeated, Pavelić escaped through so-called rat lines. While in exile in Argentina and later Spain, Pavelić gave interviews and wrote statements defending his actions.
Then in 1958, Pavelić made a rare appearance on television, justifying his past as Croatia's wartime fascist dictator.
He claimed he had served God and Croatia, dismissing evidence of mass murder as allied in communist lies. Even after surviving a 1957 assassination attempt in Buenos Aires, he defended his atrocities as a struggle for independence. 2 years later, he died of his wounds, convinced he was a patriot, not a monster.
A year later, Pavelić was murdered, the victim of an assassin.
Jeffrey Dahmer. When police entered Jeffrey Dahmer's Milwaukee apartment in 1991, they found something out of a nightmare.
Jeffrey Dahmer was responsible for killing more than a dozen people. The majority of those murders happened in an apartment near the Marquette campus.
What chilled investigators most wasn't the scene, it was his confession. Dahmer calmly described his murders as though recounting daily chores, admitting to killing 17 people.
He gave full confessions to the police, detailing his involvement in 16 separate slayings.
He explained his grotesque acts with a detached honesty that made it all so much worse. His actions were motivated by his need to have his victims stay with him. Dahmer knew what he was doing was wrong, but he couldn't overcome his urges. His emotionless honesty made his confession one of the most terrifying glimpses into a murderer's mind ever recorded.
And he carefully went about his killings under the radar of the police and the people of Milwaukee.
Hermann Göring. Hitler's designated successor, Hermann Göring, rose higher than almost anyone in the Nazi hierarchy. His status made his trial at Nuremberg a worldwide spectacle.
But Göring does not look contrite or ashamed.
At the Nuremberg trial, Göring shows his true colours. He's laughing, he's dismissive, he's arrogant, and he shows no remorse.
When confronted with evidence of genocide and war crimes, he showed no trace of remorse. He downplayed his involvement with regards to the Holocaust, stating that others were in charge of concentration camps.
He is nervous, yet he smiles and smirks when the prosecution lawyers are making their case, scoffing at the evidence brought forward.
He did, however, boast about his loyalty to Hitler, rearming Germany and regaining lost territory. Even when condemned to hang, he refused to let anyone else dictate his fate. The night before his scheduled execution, Göring bit down on a hidden cyanide capsule.
Conceited and deluded to the end.
Gilles de Rais. Once a celebrated knight and comrade of Joan of Arc, Gilles de Rais is now remembered for his horrific legacy. After his military glory faded, he turned his wealth and power toward depravity. De Rais abducted and murdered dozens, possibly hundreds of minors in his castle. When finally arrested, his confession shocked the consciences, even for those living in an age of constant death and violence. De Rais admitted he was driven by pleasure. At trial, he alternated between weeping and boasting, begging forgiveness one moment and describing his crimes in chilling detail the next. Before his execution, he repented, but his eerie calm left witnesses unsure if they'd seen redemption or performance. H.H. Holmes. Described as one of America's first documented serial killers, H.H. Holmes lived inside a monument to death and deceit.
In essence, this is a person who spends a lot of time fantasizing about death and killing. But overall, there's more to this. The killing is actually part of the fulfillment of his fantasy process.
In Chicago, it's been claimed he built a labyrinthine hotel filled with soundproof rooms, hidden corridors, and gas chambers. It would later be dubbed his murder castle.
The frightening thing about Holmes is that he was not mad, that he used his intelligence and his ability to plan in order to carry out the killings.
When finally caught, Holmes admitted he had killed 27 people, though given his tendency for fabricating details, it's hard to pin down an exact number. In his own words, "I was born with the devil in me," explaining that he felt no remorse and no ability to stop. Even on the gallows, Holmes remained calm right until the end.
But what Holmes has done is to create really a killing machine, a factory for getting these bodies, for harvesting these individuals who innocently have come into contact with him.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. Adolf Eichmann. When the Nazi regime collapsed, its surviving leaders were hunted down and forced to answer for the unthinkable.
Adolf Eichmann is the senior Nazi administrator who organized the Holocaust.
Some, like Rudolf Haas, the commandant of Auschwitz, described their crimes with chilling precision. Others, like Albert Speer, cloaked themselves in remorse while quietly deflecting blame. But none embodied the machinery of genocide quite like Adolf Eichmann. At his trial in Jerusalem, Eichmann didn't rant or gloat. Instead, he spoke clinically like an accountant.
Eichmann argued he was rather a low-ranking bureaucrat. He was a cog in a much wider and more powerful machine. Therefore, it was unjust that he was on trial in the first place.
He claimed he had followed orders, insisting he bore no personal guilt for the millions murdered under his watch. That was the true horror, not monstrous rage, but meek obedience. His calm defense revealed how evil could hide behind routine, how a system could carry the sins so its servants didn't have to.
What was evil about Eichmann was the banality with which he sat in his office day after day and consigned millions of people to their deaths. He was an armchair murderer. He was a bureaucrat who facilitated the murder of millions, and yet to him, it was just a job.
Did we miss any other monstrous confessions from history? Let us know in the comments.